Hello, today we are going to talk about isopod nutrition. So whether you're going to set up an isopod colony or you have an isopod colony or you're putting isopods into a bioactive enclosure, today we'll talk all about what they'll eat and keeping them nice and healthy. This is Croc, and she is a cool reticulated gargoyle gecko, and she's just here to hang out with me today while I feed the isopods and show you what we got going on. No matter where your isopods live, the first level of nutrition is actually going to be their substrate. So if you use cocoa coir, then that is a inert substrate that has no nutritional value for your isopods. So instead you want to give them a lot of good organic matter in their substrate. Topsoil can accomplish this, but you can also mix in additives. Flake soil, which is commonly sold for millipedes, is fermented wood, and that's a great option for your isopods. You can also grind up leaves and put that as part of their substrate. You can buy a mix such as ABG or ones that are designed specifically for isopods, and this is going to be a huge part of their nutrition because they're gonna eat their soil, and as they consume the soil, it will eventually turn into just isopod frass or poop, and you'll need to switch it out, which will be a video coming soon. Your second level of nutrition is actually going to be the leaves and the mosses that you put into the enclosure. So if you're going to use a live moss or a forest moss, that's going to be your best bet, because it's going to provide additional nutrients for them. And you can use a variety of leaf litters. The softer the leaves, the faster they decompose and turn into food for the isopods. So you'll notice that this bin here has live oak leaves, and they're a thicker, harder leaf, and they've been eaten a lot less than they would have if I had used a thin oak leaf or a maple leaf. You can also buy magnolia leaves, and those are the ones that last the longest. And on the one hand, it provides nutrients for a longer term, and on the other hand, it takes a while for that to decompose enough that the isopods are using it as a food source. So it can be good to mix that in with your other options. Next up is bark and wood. Rotting wood is excellent, and seed pods. So as you can see, the isopods have really eaten a lot of this cork bark here, and created even more tunnels for them to live in, as well as consumed the wood that was there. Cork bark is not supposed to be as nutritious as some other barks and woods, but it is easy to find and inexpensive, so that's why I often use it. You can also include lots of seed pods. Magnolia pods are popular, and you can buy them as whole, like sold specifically for isopods, or you can find them out in the wild. A lot of times it is recommended to sanitize stuff that comes from the wild, though a growing number of people are arguing that the sanitization process gets rid of bacteria and mold that the isopods would consume, which is a really good point. Here I sanitize things that come from outside because I live in North Carolina, and that includes roach species that are often called palmetto bugs, such as the smoky brown and the American roach, and I would prefer not to bring them in and introduce them to my isopod bins where there's lots of food and hiding places. So all of the natural things should be included as part of either your colony bin setup or your bioactive enclosure. You should also have these things available for your isopods and the other critters in your bioactive enclosure when you're doing that. However, we're going to get into the supplementation feeding. So I consider all of that stuff part of your bin, and your isopods are definitely going to eat it, definitely going to enjoy it. But if you want your isopods to really grow and their population to boom, you will eventually need to supplemental feed. And that is what the question most people are asking when they're like, what do I feed my isopods? So the first category we are going to talk about is commercial isopod food. There is a growing number of people who are creating food, and you could find a small company who's creating isopod food, or you can find a big company. Rapashi sells morning wood, which is for isopods, and Josh's Frogs has an isopod food or a cleanup crew food. There's other companies out there, so they're very plentiful, and you can simply grab a mix and feed it to them once or twice a week, and it's that simple. Or you can get a lot more complicated, as we'll talk about in the next few minutes. So my bins have springtails in there, just in case you were wondering what those little tiny bugs are. Those are the springtails, and they help make a perfect ecosystem with the isopods. So the first category of things that you can feed your isopods is fruits and vegetables. And this can be really, really easy, especially if you've only got a few isopods and you eat any sorts of vegetable or fruit matter. A lot of people will feed cucumbers or broccoli. I've heard of kale and spinach and apples and watermelon. All of these things work in small amounts. The small amounts part I think is really important because if you have a lot of moisture and a lot of sugar in your bin, then you're very likely to draw pests such as fruit flies and fungus gnats. And that part is not fun. In fact, many people who have a lot of isopods deal with both of those things anyway. So you want to make sure that you're feeding small amounts of fruits and vegetables. I use our leftover bits. So if there's a piece of lettuce that people wouldn't really want to eat, then I chop that up and feed that to the isopods. And I like free food. So you can also toss all your bits and bobs in the freezer and do an isopod salad, like every now and again, which is actually what I do. I toss it all in the freezer and then just give them little bits at a time. The next category of food would be other creatures' prepared food. So this could be fish food flakes or gecko food. In my opinion, gecko food is a little expensive, but it is full of some really good stuff in there. So I use, and so you may have noticed a couple of cups in these. I oftentimes toss in the leftover gecko food in a cup, in one of the little plastic cups from my geckos. So it's stuff that would normally be thrown away or washed away, and then it's put in there. Then you also have dead things. So isopods will eat dead bugs if you have leftover dead bugs. Most of them don't find it to be their favorite food, but they will eat that. They'll also eat dead shrimp or like dried shrimp, dried fish. You can buy pre-made mixes that have dried bugs and shrimp in it. And they'll also eat small mice or rats if you have snakes that have refused to eat your isopods. If your colony is big enough, they can clean that up for you. I throw in gecko eggs when they're not any good, when they've started to mold, and I've also thrown in the gecko eggshells, and they'll eat those. So all of that works out really well. The next category of food that I would consider would be animal waste category. And this one causes a lot of controversy among the isopod keepers in some of the isopod groups that I belong in. So in the nobody argues whether or not you should put it in their group would be things like lizard sheds or snake sheds that have not been eaten by the animal who shed them. Snakes don't eat their shed, but lizards often do. But if you have pieces of those sheds, then you can toss those in with the isopods and they'll happily eat it. The more controversial topic would be the poop. So it is the whole purpose of having a bioactive enclosure is for the cleanup crew to help you clean up animal waste. And so if you have a bioactive cleanup crew for your lizards or your snakes, then you would want them to eat the waste. Sometimes the waste is more than your cleanup crew can consume. So if you have like a ball python where it has a big amount of waste at one time, then your cleanup crew might still need you to spot clean your enclosure. However, isopods will also eat other kinds of waste, and this gets to be the thing that our people argue about in the groups. So if you have a rabbit or a rat or another pet mammal that you might want to consider adding waste from, then it would be wise to do so carefully. So rabbit poo is pretty much partially digested grass or hay, and I think that that would be perfectly fine to add to your isopod group if you really wanted to. I personally have a rabbit and do not add his poo to it. The rats are interesting. I've seen a lot of people fight about this in the groups, and I find it interesting because I also belong to a bioactive rat group. So there's a whole bunch of people who have turned their rat cages into bioactive enclosures by having a cleanup crew in the substrate at the bottom of the cage, and then the rats build tunnels naturally like they would in the wild, and of course they're going to the bathroom down there, and your goal is to have your isopod group big enough that they can eat the waste of the rats. So it makes absolute sense that if you really wanted to collect rat poo and put it in your isopod bin, then you could totally do that, and it would be free food. Cat and dog poo is smellier and grosser in my opinion, and also more likely to have parasites. So I would not do that personally. I have heard of people in the isopod group though putting the contents from their litter box or their backyard in their isopod bin, and isopods will eat that, so that would be your call. You may also want to collect from your snakes if you have a lot of isopods, or you could collect the waste from them, and that would also be your call. One last category of food that I think it is really important to talk about is the calcium. So isopods are actually crustaceans similar to shrimp, only they live on land, and it is important that they have calcium for all of their processes. So you can provide calcium in a number of different ways. It can include just crushed up eggshell, which I use a lot here because we eat a lot of eggs and it's, again, free food. You can also use oyster shell like you would buy for chickens, because chickens use that for their crop. Or you can buy cuttlebone, which is often sold for parrots. And the final addition that works really well is limestone. And in my opinion, from the research that I've done, limestone might be the only thing that is important to change about the Cubaris species. So they come from limestone caves, and they do seem to do better with the addition of limestone into their substrate. And then I occasionally sprinkle additional limestone onto their the surface. So you do want to make sure that you're providing calcium. This is one of those magnolia pods, and if you look under the bottom, you can see that they've been happily enjoying the pod and eating it, as well as using it as a place to hide. If you've made it this far, you might be wondering, yeah, but what are you feeding them? And it's kind of an interesting answer. So this little pile of mix here is actually food that I made up for my roaches, and it includes a lot of different stuff. It includes yeasts, and it includes some grains, and spirulina, and morning wood. And so I mixed up a huge batch of food that included a lot of different things. Oh, bee pollen is in there. And I feed it to my isopods. So this is my rubber ducky culture, and the rubber duckies are multiplying. There's one next to a springtail. They really don't like to be shown off though. So often when I flip over the wood, all the rubber duckies disappear, which is kind of funny. They are often sought after and probably the number one known, at least by name, isopod, and yet they are some of the shyest isopods I have, making them, I don't know, in my opinion, less amazing pets than some of the others. This one's being pretty brave as he's found something to eat. How often you feed them is going to be based in part on your goals. So if you are just supplementing your bioactive enclosure, then just feeding them every other week or so with a little bit of food will help keep them growing. If you started with a very small number though, and you would like a large number because you have a big enclosure, then you'll probably want to feed them once a week. But your goal is to feed them only enough food that they eat it before it molds. So that's usually in a day, maybe 2 days. And feeding them small feedings more often is a better value than feeding them a ton of food that then sits there and gets moldy and gross. It should also be noted that if you are feeding a colony like this, then you want to be prepared for a population boom. If you have especially for a faster breeding variety such as dairy cows or powder oranges, you want to make sure that you're ready when the tub is crawling with too many. If there get to be too many, then you can have a crash because the soil can't sustain the number of isopods that are in there. This is a very healthy colony of panda kings. And they're related to the rubber duckies, but breed faster. And they'll have this little pile of food gone by tomorrow morning. This is a more of a burrowing species, and so just what you see is really just on the top, and there'll be lots of them in an hour or two. So you want to make sure that they're eating all of their food fairly quickly before it gets gross. When it gets gross, it'll start molding, but the bigger thing is that it will invite in other animals, and that can cause a pest-like situation. So most of the other animals won't harm your isopods, but they can be annoying for people. So fungus, gnats, and fruit flies are always annoying for the people. But they're also going to compete for resources. So the larva will eat the isopod food, and then they're going to compete for the resources. If you're feeding grains, this mix does have some grains in it, then overfeeding can also cause a lot of grain mites, and fish food is also one that can attract a lot of grain mites, and they'll be little tiny and in your soil, and they can make a mess around the room too. Like if you get a lot of them, they'll be dusty looking around the room as they're moving, which is kind of creepy. Soil mites is another possible problem with a lot of food in the soil. So remembering isopods' role in nature will help you figure out what they can and cannot eat. I've heard of people offering some really crazy things, such as fingernail and toenail clippings. They are decomposers in nature, so if it's something that will get decomposed out in the wild, then it will get eaten in your bin or your enclosure. These guys have run from the light. They're like, no. And there you have it. Basic guide of isopod nutrition. It doesn't have to be complicated or difficult. It can be as easy as you want it to be. It can be fairly inexpensive if you're going with things you collected from outside, and things that you would normally throw away. I was hoping that guy would peek out again because it was adorable. But anyway. So leave your comments below about what your favorite isopod food is if you have isopod colonies. And I'd love it if you took a moment to subscribe and to like and comment. It would be fantastic. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.